Okay, our next speaker, very busy person. Among other things, I have to read this off my list. She is a senior coach at Lean Poker. She's a developer advocate, the creator and host of the Morning Commute YouTube channel, and a trans rights activist. Please welcome to our stage, Ivett Ördög.
This is a leadership conference, so I assume that most of you in here are either leaders or want to be leaders. As leaders, we make decisions, and these decisions are sometimes easy, sometimes hard. Sometimes they are low risk, sometimes they are higher stakes. So, for example, some low risk decisions. What's the next feature we are going to develop in the next 2 weeks? It's just 2 weeks, not much risk there. How do we redistribute resources among teams when we are starting a new phase in our development? Or things like that. Another kind of decisions when it's high stakes. So for example, if you are considering to acquire another company, that's pretty high stakes, right? Or if you are considering entering a new market segment, that's also pretty high stakes. Then, for example, you might be considering abandoning a project that was taking too much time. That's also. We also make decisions in our personal lives. For example, you might think of, am I going to rent my new home or am I going to buy a new home? Or which school should my children attend? Things like that. So as leaders, we know how to make decisions. How do we do that? We might try to estimate the return on investment, analyze the risks involved, maybe create a pros and cons list. That's something I have done a lot of times. But the most important thing that we are trying to do is to make a timely decision. Because the wrong decision is better than no decision at all. Or is it? So 2018, early in 2018, I had a decision to make. And it was a very personal decision. It wasn't a business decision. And it made me reconsider a lot of things about decisions. Or decision-making. But before I go there, let me show you a short part from the movie Matrix. Do you remember the red pill, blue pill scene? Okay, so this is going to be from that.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me.
A splinter in your mind that is driving you mad. These few words capture what gender dysphoria feels like really well. It's like this feeling you cannot explain, you don't know why it is there, you just feel that it makes you depressed from time to time and frustrated. It's an awful feeling that's really, really hard to explain. And much like the Wachowskis, the directors and writers of Matrix, I had this weird feeling that something was off. And it took me some time before I realized that despite all physical evidence, I wasn't the guy. I was a girl. How many of you knew that Matrix was directed by 2 trans women? Just curious. Not many of you, yeah. So at least one thing you already learned. So that was my red pill, blue pill moment. I had to decide, I had to make a decision. And yeah, I had a wife at the time. We were planning to start a family. I had a career. I was already known as the creator of Lean Poker. I've been talking at conferences around Europe. I've been coaching people, and yeah, so for example, Lean Poker had already been organized in 30 cities around the world, from San Francisco, USA to Auckland, New Zealand. So that was something I was risking. And you know, when I told my ex-wife that I had this problem and then that I was thinking of transitioning, he made it clear that she was supportive of me, but she was gonna support me as a friend and not as my partner. So having known that was already devastating enough. And then think about the possibility of losing friends, losing my job, not finding another job, and also like bigger issues, like, for example, rape and sexual assault and physical abuse. Those are all things that are more likely if you're a trans woman. Just one example of a statistic, every other trans woman experiences sexual assault in their life, every second. Now, that sounds really high, and it is, and fun fact is that even, or not so fun fact, that even for women, this number is 1 in 3, and for men, it's 1 in 4. This, of course, sexual assault may not mean rape. For rape, the numbers are just as bad. 1 in 3 trans women experience rape during their lifetime, and this number is 1 in 5 for women and 1 in 48 for men. So yeah, I was risking a lot here. But after all, I'm a leader. I know how to make decisions. I've been doing that. For example, when we had a bug fix that we had to do, that bug fix may have been done, but we have to wait for QA to release it. Or should we wait? Should we risk that bug causing further damage, or should we risk the bug fix having unintentional side effects? Or when we add a new feature, should we add that to the monolith, where it's really convenient to do, and we can add it quickly? Or should we start a new service, a new microservice, and invest into our future that way? So these are decisions that we make daily. And we know that the wrong decision is better than no decision at all. Or is it? So I was there contemplating my options, trying to think of the pros and cons, but it wasn't really helpful. I mean, how do you compare feeling depressed like half the time for the rest of your life to losing the person you love, the person you planned your entire life with? If I were to start transitioning, then all of the plans we had together, that was gone. So yeah, that was something I tried to think of, and it felt like I was going to shoot myself in the foot in some way. It was just like, which foot is it gonna be? So, but I was trying to make a decision. I mean, after all, the wrong decision is better than no decision at all. Or is it? Why do leaders say this? Why do we think that the wrong decision is better than no decision at all? Now here's the thing. When you make a decision and you start acting on it, you are creating an experiment. Your hypothesis is this decision is going to be right. I know this is going to be right. So what you do is you get your metrics out, you pick one that you think represents your desired effects really well, and then you start acting on the decision. Wait a little, check your metrics closely, and then if something isn't moving the way you want it to, then you make another decision, you course correct, right? That's the way I was making decisions all the time, because I knew, okay, maybe I'm not right on this point, but if I just try it and see how it works out, then I can still fix this. Now, this breaks down the moment you cannot revert your decision. When your decision when the cost of your decision, the risk, is materializing right away, and the benefits come later. Classic example is a company acquisition. When you are acquiring a company, once you paid the money, then it's gone. And whatever you hoped would be the benefit of that acquisition, we don't know yet. Another example that I really like is Google. They tried to enter the social network business, trying to compete with Facebook. How many of those projects failed, right? They put a lot of effort into those projects, they released it, and all that money gone and no benefits. So basically, the way we try to mitigate risks around decisions is either avoid the risk, which in my case wasn't an option because both options actually had risks, or you try to, what's the word? Sorry, so you try to just put the risk on someone else. This is like having an insurance, right? You can say that I have a risk of losing this car, so I'm going to make an insurance on that, and if it gets lost, I'm not in trouble. Or basically, the other two options that you can have is accept the risk, which is like, okay, I know there is a risk, and if the bad thing happens, I'm going to take it. Or you can mitigate the risk. And here in this case, I could only mitigate the risk before the decision because the risks, the costs are incurred immediately. So how do we deal with these situations like that where we have this kind of situation where we have a huge amount of cost and risk upfront and we cannot revert on our decision? Sorry, other way. Okay, so first advice is that you should try to think of the advantages instead of disadvantages. So one of the mistakes that I made early on was I was thinking, okay, either I'm going to lose my partner or I'm going to be depressed a lot. And these two feel really bad. So the alternative is like start thinking of on the positive side and try to make your decision about the positives of each option instead of the negatives. And then you might not feel self-pity. A second advice is that you should lean into your values, because the really difficult decisions are the ones where the options are not clearly good or bad, right? So for example, let me give you an example. If you were about to choose a career, you were thinking, okay, either I'm going to do this thing that I have passion for or this other thing that pays really well. How do you choose? Higher salary is not inherently better than following your passion. For my personal example, I had passion for two things. One was music and the other was software engineering. And the reason I chose software engineering as a career was that I thought, okay, financial stability on one hand, and being celebrated at the end of every performance and getting that emotional boost on the other hand. Oh, well, yeah, I'm going to go with financial stability. So that's one of the things that you should concentrate on. Now, here's the thing. If you make a decision like that, either consciously or unconsciously, it will be based on your values. Because if you consciously base your decision on your values, done. It's been based on that. If it's not conscious, And what happens is basically you take an action, and the way people see you is through those actions. So even if you don't think it's your value that was making that decision for you, people are going to see you as that person having that value. Does that make sense? So that's why I think it's better to consciously lean into our values, because that makes it easier to understand the consequences of our decisions on how people see us and how we relate to ourselves. Now, the third thing I think is really important is to lean in, to trust the scientific method. I already told you that when we make a decision and watch the metrics, that's basically a scientific experiment. Now, if you cannot make the decision without incurring all the costs, then you have to find another way of doing those experiments, right? So basically what you do is you try to verbalize your risks, verbalize your fears, and create experiments for each separately. Low-risk experiments that you can do. You won't be able to solve all of your fears or risks, but you can take some and dissect those into smaller experiments and see if you can mitigate at least some of the risks by creating these experiments. And finally, know when it's time to make up your mind. So what I think is a risk here, or something that you should look out for, is that when there is a decision where you have the status quo and an alternative, that's really, in these cases, we are prone to just delaying the decision. We don't want to make a decision that changes status quo. This is called status quo bias, by the way. So what you want to do is avoid this. You want to make a decision at some point and say, okay, I'm going to stick with the status quo, and then not think about anymore about the other option, or you're going to say, I'm going to disrupt the status quo, and that's where I'm going, and this is where I'm going to do it. Now, if you don't set a deadline, then it's really easy to just delay it until you forget about the whole thing. And that's not a good practice. So you will never be 100% sure. Even with these techniques, you will have doubts. But the important part is to make sure that your decision was based on facts that you gathered with the scientific method, and it's based on your values, so that you don't have regrets afterwards, right? Okay. So back to my personal story. All of these advices that I just gave you, I used them. Actually, some of those advices were given to me by my ex-wife, whose support was invaluable during this process, by the way. So let's go through them. First, what I said, try to look on the positive side, right? So I had this fear of losing my partner and ending up alone. And I was like, okay, but at the same time, I might lose her, but I will have a chance to find someone who loves me as a woman. And sure enough, by now, I know that I found a boyfriend. I have a trans guy as a boyfriend, and by the way, he was amazing. This morning, he got me a bouquet of roses for Valentine's. It was so sweet. I wasn't even awake yet. So yeah, that was great. Okay, what else? Then I was afraid of losing my job. But I've been in the job for 7 years. Maybe it's time for a new adventure. And not finding another job, maybe it's time that I create my own business. I was thinking of that for quite a few years. Why not try it? I was afraid I would lose my friends. But if you think about it, we can also think of this as a test of friendships. Those friends who are going to stick by me, those are my real friends. And whoever isn't sticking by me probably wasn't a real friend after all. And by now, I know that most of my friends didn't just stick around. They were there for me during the hardest parts of my transition, when my hormones were haywire and I was crying like a baby, because that's what happens when they replace your hormones in a few months. So yeah, there were positives after all. Okay, so what else? We said lean into our values. Okay, so at the time when I was contemplating this, someone close to me died. He was a friend and a colleague. And at his funeral, I was thinking, would I regret it more if I were to die today? Would I regret it more that I don't have children? Or would I regret it more that I've been playing a role my entire life that's just not me, that no one really saw me as the person I'm inside? Is it more important to adhere to society's expectations, or is it more important to be our true self? Then how about the scientific method? How did I use that? Well, I thought of it, okay, I cannot start hormone replacement therapy without any risks. Once you start that, it becomes really hard to go back, so what can we do? Well, I figured I could learn how to do makeup and how to dress as a woman, hide my masculine body behind proper clothes, and learn how to do makeup that's feminizing the face. Turns out there are people who are really good at this and can teach you. And then once I wasn't passing during the day. I mean, if I went out to the street during the day, everyone could tell that I was a transvestite or whatever. But at night, I was pretty good at it. So at night, I could pass fairly easily. So what I did was I came out to a few friends, and we went to a bar, and then to a cinema. And we just went out, and I experienced what it feels like to be a woman in society. As I was gaining confidence at this, I even went to my first Pride March as a female. And I will never forget the euphoria, the gender euphoria I felt. It was like the exact opposite of this weird splinter in my mind kind of thing. So yeah, that gave me valuable information too. Also, I started to use my new name, Ivett, in certain social contexts where people knew what was going on with me. I asked them to use my new name instead of my old one. So I was gathering these kinds of informations. I also did another kind of experiment. I decided to go on holiday with my ex, and I decided that during those few days, I'm gonna try to stick to being a guy, and I'm gonna try to just numb the dysphoria and see if I can, truly enjoy myself during those few days of a holiday. Turns out Pandora's box was open. In those few days, yeah, I really like hiking, but every time I saw another woman, I was jealous. So that was also a valuable experiment. So, and then finally, setting a deadline. I actually set myself a deadline. The deadline was like, I'm gonna do this and this and this experiment, and I knew that my last experiment is going on holiday with my ex, and after that, within 2 weeks, I'm gonna make a decision. And I did. I took the red pill. Now, a year later, I went back to the Alps hiking, and this is exactly how I felt. I was on top of the world. After climbing these mountains and going through all those hardships, I was on the top of the world. And I don't regret my decision. Why don't I regret my decision? Well, first of all, I feel great. So that's on the positive side. Second, this decision was based on my values. And even if it had been a wrong decision, I know that I had all those experiments, I had the facts straight, I had my values straight. Given all the facts that I had at the time, there was no way I could have made a better decision. So yeah, and also like I learned a lot of things during that period. So for example, I will never know if my wife would have a different reaction if I told her sooner. I didn't hold back information for long, but for a couple of months. And I'm not sure how that eroded her trust. So now I know that delaying information is something that erodes trust and something you should avoid. Also, like giving feedback, I used to delay that a lot before, and now I'm more like, okay, here's the problem, I'm gonna go to that person, I'm gonna tell it. Because as a leader, when you're not giving feedback instantly, that is also eroding trust. Also, I learned that, like I knew before that inclusion is important. I knew that it's important for employees to feel at home at the company. But having transitioned and having experienced what it feels like to not be included, that was something that surprised me, how much of a difference it makes. Actually, when I was making the decision that I'm going to transition, I knew that some people are going to give me a hard time at work. I kind of expected that. But what I didn't expect is that one day I would be accused of driving my partner away from the company. We were working at the same company. And I was accused that she is leaving because I made her go away. I would have never expected that one day I'd be walking out of HR with the information that someone complained about aspects of my transition, being asked to not be my whole self at work, and being denied the information of who that was, or even to talk to her. After that happened, that incident at HR, I felt like I was looking around the office and I was like, everybody could have been that person. And I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. So I actually quit that job and went somewhere else. What else? So I'm an activist. I'm one of the organizers of the first Budapest Trans Pride, which happened last November. So as an activist, I talk to a lot of people. I talk to everybody who just asks questions about what it feels like to be trans and how do you transition and all that stuff. I'm putting myself out there. But the thing is, I can do that in my free time. Whenever I have to do that at work, it's just too much of a burden. Because like at work, I want to concentrate on my work, right? I don't want to be an activist at work. So if you have people in your company who are parts of a minority, help them. Try to educate each other and help them get closer to acceptance in that community. Also, like when someone is part of a minority. So for me, people around me actually trusted me just as much professionally as before. I didn't have a problem with people not taking me seriously. But when I was talking about my issues as a minority, a lot of people were dismissive. So we actually need cis-hetero allies who just help other people understand that these issues are real and shouldn't be dismissed. And finally, the most important lesson of all that I learned is that the wrong risk-mitigated decision is better than no decision at all. I mean, make a decision, a timely decision by all means, but make sure that you have done your homework, that you have ran all the experiments that you could, and that your decision is based on your values. Because these decisions that are hard, where when the options are not clear, these are the decisions that define you. These are the decisions where using the scientific method is all the more important. These are the decisions that define you. These are decisions that you should never regret. And these are the decisions that you will always remember. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We got a lot of questions, and luckily we have enough time to get to them. And the first one is actually quite hard to answer. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, on a general level, are you happy now? Have you found your inner peace?
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things that happened to me during transition was, well, even when I just started to go out a few times, I already felt like this euphoria. Like right I mentioned, when I first was on Pride as a female, that felt amazing. But as my body started to change and my hormones started to change, I felt so liberated. And one of the things that people say a lot to me is that your eyes are so much bigger now. And they are not bigger, I'm just opening them. Because before that, I was like this all the time. but now I feel like really powerful. And the other thing is that before transitioning, I could go out with friends maybe once a week. And then I had to go home and just gather the strengths again. Now I can go out whenever. I just feel at home in my body, and that makes all the difference.
That's wonderful. And as from the personal experience, now there is a question about the work life. So what do you think in 2020 Hungary, on the professional market, is there equality for the members of the LGBTQ community?
That's a tough question for me to answer. First of all, now, here's the thing. I don't know about... so my personal experience is that there wasn't a big difference. But the thing is, I've been known within the Hungarian IT community. So a lot of people actually came up to me after I transitioned that, oh, I saw that you transitioned. It's so interesting. By the way, I have a job offer for you. So that was really good for me, and I didn't experience any drawbacks on that front. But in general, the Hungarian market, not the IT market, what I see from my friends, trans friends, is that it's really hard to get a job as a trans person in general.
Yeah, that's what I guessed. And actually, one about in the beginning of your talk, you talked about conscious procrastination, and you talked about decision making.
Yeah.
And conscious procrastinating until external changes make a decision easier to be made can be better than a wrong decision made too early. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. So here's the thing. When we are talking about the wrong decision being better than no decision at all, it's in the context when you have to make a decision or you have a deadline or whatever, or when delaying the decision any further has cost. But in many cases, like, for example, one of the things that Bob Martin usually tells you about is you should not make a decision about the database early on. You should just start using flat files or whatever way of storing data until you come to that point where you can make an educated decision on what kind of database I'm going to use. And I think that's really important, that until we have enough information, we don't want to rush a decision. But once we are so there is this last responsible moment. And once we are approaching the last responsible moment, then we actually have to make a decision.
The next person wants to know a little bit more about whether you changed as a leader because of your transition.
I don't think so. I think I'm the same coaching type of leader. In fact, maybe I'm even more leaning into this coaching attitude. But so as a person, like when someone is going through transition, we don't change our personality that much. There are tiny things that do change, like we do get a bit more emotional, but these are tiny things. The main part of our personality stays the same.
But let me rephrase it a little. So, like, did your leadership style or the way you lead have a big part in how you transitioned or how you made that decision?
making the decision, yes. I absolutely leaned on whatever I knew about leading during that period. And I think I was taking longer than most people would, partly because for me, gender dysphoria wasn't as strong as for other trans people out there. Sometimes people know really early on that they are trans. For me, it was more like, yeah, I kind of feel that's probably the case, but I wasn't really sure. I just had to go through this whole process to be absolutely sure.
And the next person wants to know where that valley is that you visited.
Oh, the valley, it's right next to Heiligenblut. It's, if you go up, there is, in Heiligenblut, beautiful little village in Austria, there is a cable car that goes up onto the top of, I don't remember what hill. Anyway, I'm going to look it up for you if you look for me. And then from the top of the cable car, you can just walk, I don't know, a few hundred meters, and that's where you can look down.
And actually, the time is tricking us a little, but we have time for one more question.
Okay.
And that would be, it is clear that building a habit of indecision is wrong, but why do you think we have to make decisions in all cases?
I'm not sure I'm agreeing with that. I'm not sure if we have to make a decision every time. Sometimes we can just let things happen. But okay, I'm a control freak. I usually like to make my own decisions and not let things happen the way they are. But I can see value in delaying a decision. But at the same time, if you don't make a decision yourself, life is gonna make a decision for you. So, or that's also a decision. If you don't make a decision, that's also a decision that you are not gonna make a decision there.
I think that's a wonderful closing remark. Thank you so much, Ivett, for being here. And this is just a little something for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.